My name is Harold Black, and I am 62 years old. What I'm about to share will change the way you look at your own family forever. Just a few days ago, the two people Margaret and I trusted most in this world, our own son David and his wife Laura, pushed us off a 100-foot cliff. Before we continue, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. I never imagined the end of my life would begin on a bright morning in the mountains, with my son smiling at me as if we were simply out for a pleasant hike. One moment we were standing together, admiring the valley below, and the next I felt his hands against my back, sending me into the abyss. The impact shattered bone and breath alike. Blood filled my mouth, and every nerve screamed with pain. Through the haze I heard Margaret's voice, trembling but determined. "Harold, don't move. Play dead." Her words, quiet as a prayer, became my only lifeline. But even as I lay there, fighting to stay conscious, I realized the fall wasn't the worst part. No, the true agony came from the secret my wife and I had uncovered just days earlier. A secret that had been buried for 25 years. A truth about our sons, Edward and David, that tore apart everything we thought we knew about love, loyalty, and family. And it all began long before that cliff. For more than 4 decades, Margaret and I built what we believed was the perfect life. Every morning in our quiet Midwestern town, we woke up to the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, the sound of sparrows outside the window, and the rhythm of a marriage forged through hard work and devotion. I taught history at the local high school, and my students often joked that I told stories about the past, as if I had lived through every event myself. Margaret, steady and graceful, kept our home warm and welcoming, filling it with the aroma of her Sunday roasts and the laughter of visiting neighbors. We raised 2 boys beneath that roof. Edward, our firstborn, 5 years older than his brother David. From the beginning, Edward was the light of the house, always quick with a joke, eager to help me in the garage or carry groceries for his mother. He had a way of making Margaret laugh until tears rolled down her cheeks, and when I looked at him, I saw the kind of man every father hopes his son will become: steady, kind, dependable. David, on the other hand, was more reserved, a boy who kept his thoughts tucked away like hidden notes in a drawer. I never doubted his heart, though. As a father, you convince yourself that different doesn't mean lesser, that quiet doesn't mean troubled. I thought loving him fiercely was enough. Sundays were sacred in our house. After church, we would gather around the oak table I had sanded and polished with my own hands, the same table that later became the stage for our darkest conversations. Edward would talk about his dream of becoming an engineer, about building bridges that would last longer than a lifetime. David would mostly pick at his food, speaking only when spoken to, his eyes often wandering to the window as if he were looking for another world entirely. But in those days I told myself that silence was just part of his nature. Life was simple, good, almost storybook. Margaret and I took evening walks down the trail that looped around town, holding hands like young lovers, talking about grandchildren we'd one day spoil, trips we'd take after retirement, the smaller house we'd build once the boys had families of their own. We never imagined those walks were preparing us for the night we would stumble through darkness toward a truth too awful to face. Weekends often brought my sisters, Martha and Helen, with their husbands and children. Our yard would fill with the shrieks of kids playing tag, while the men hammered nails into some new project and the women swapped recipes in the kitchen. It was noisy, chaotic, but it was everything Margaret and I had ever dreamed of. In those years, I believed we had achieved what so many couples only hope for: stability, respect in our community, and children who would carry our legacy forward. Even in the quiet moments, Margaret bringing me wildflowers from the roadside, or me holding planks of wood while she steadied them for cutting, we existed as a team. An unbreakable unit, or so I thought. At night, after the house was finally silent, we would sit on the porch and watch the stars prick through the velvet sky. We talked about visiting the ocean for the first time, about traveling west to see the Rockies, about growing old together in that very house. I held those dreams close, never questioning whether the foundation of our family was as solid as the beams in the houses I helped build for neighbors. But life has a way of hiding fractures beneath polished surfaces. And it wasn't until Edward turned 20 that the cracks began to show. I noticed whispers between the boys, sharp words that cut off whenever I entered the hallway. Margaret brushed it aside, said brothers argue, said it was nothing. I wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. because the thought that my family wasn't perfect was too heavy to carry. But one October night, when Edward didn't come home, when the hours dragged past midnight and into dawn, when searchers found his body at the bottom of the river gorge, everything changed. The police told us it was an accident, that maybe he slipped in the dark. Margaret clung to that explanation because it was the only way to survive the grief. But I saw something different in David's eyes, something cold and distant that haunted me even as we laid Edward to rest. That funeral was the blackest day of my life, and yet it was only the beginning of a nightmare that would take 25 years to fully reveal itself. After Edward's funeral, a strange quiet settled over our house, the kind that seeps into the walls and lingers like damp air in a basement. I expected David to retreat further into himself, but instead, something changed. He became attentive in ways I had never seen before, almost as if Edward's death had unlocked a gentleness that had been hidden all along. He carried groceries without being asked, sat with Margaret when grief hollowed her out, helped me with repairs around the house. Neighbors even remarked on how mature he seemed, how devoted he was to making us smile again. At first I told myself this was his way of grieving, of filling the void his older brother had left behind. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But looking back now, I realize it was something much darker, the careful construction of a mask, a disguise meant to cover the rot underneath. In those early years, Margaret clung to David's new attentiveness as proof that God had not abandoned us. "He's trying to make up for Edward's absence," she would say, stroking his hair as if he were still the little boy who once hid behind her skirts. I nodded, though I always felt a tightening in my chest when I looked at him too long. There was a flicker in his eyes, a glint that reminded me of the night at the gorge, though I buried that memory so deep it almost felt like a dream. Life moved forward as it always does, dragging us with it. David married Laura, a young woman from the next town who at first seemed like the daughter Margaret had always wanted. She was sweet, thoughtful, the kind of woman who helped clear the table after Sunday dinners and called me Dad with an affection that seemed genuine. When their first child was born, Margaret wept with joy, holding the baby as if he were a miracle that could heal every wound. For a time, it felt as though the world had given us a second chance at happiness. David built his own carpentry business, boasting that he had inherited my hands, and Laura helped with the books, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with tidy numbers. They bought a modest home, then a nicer one, and for years, every outward sign pointed to success and stability. I allowed myself to believe we were finally safe, that the storm had passed. But storms have a way of circling back. The first warning came 6 months ago, when Margaret and I decided to update our will. We had worked our entire lives, saving carefully, living modestly, building up nearly $200,000 between the house, the land I inherited from my parents, and the savings account we had tended like a fragile garden. It seemed only responsible to make arrangements. When we mentioned our plans, David insisted on accompanying us to the lawyer. "It's important to have everything in order," he said with a smile that seemed warm at the time but now curdles in my memory. Laura held Margaret's hand and added, "We just want to make sure you're protected." I should have heard the sharp edge beneath her sweetness, but I didn't. The lawyer, Albert, an old friend who had known our family for decades, explained our options. A trust, a traditional will, dividing the inheritance equally among the grandchildren. David pressed for something different. He wanted himself and Laura named as sole heirs, promising they would handle the distribution fairly. "Besides," he argued, "you'll need us when you're older. It's better for us to have access so we can take care of you properly." Margaret hesitated, but she has always trusted too easily, and I, weak from years of avoiding the truth about my son, let myself be persuaded. We signed the papers on a Tuesday. Laura wore a green dress and hugged Margaret tightly afterward, whispering, "Now we're a united family forever." I remember a shiver running down my spine, though I brushed it off as sentimentality. That night, as I washed dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had made a terrible mistake. In the weeks that followed, David and Laura visited more often, but their presence no longer felt like family. They arrived with suggestions about selling the house, buying life insurance, investing our savings. They spoke with the confidence of people who believed they already owned us. Laura once trailed her fingers across our furniture as if she were taking inventory, remarking how much work it must be to keep up such a big place. When Margaret protested, saying she couldn't imagine leaving the home where we had raised our children, David snapped in a tone I had never heard before. "Mom, you're being irrational. This house is too much for people your age. If you fall down the stairs, who will help you?" His words chilled me, not because of their logic, but because of the coldness behind them. Still, I tried to dismiss it. Fathers forgive, fathers hope, but hope is a fragile thing when pressed against reality. One evening, after another tense conversation about finances, Margaret asked me whether I thought it strange that David was suddenly so invested in our money. I told her he cared about us, that he just wanted to help. Yet even as I said the words, I saw the shadow of doubt in her eyes, and it mirrored the one I carried in my own heart. That was the night I realized the past wasn't buried at all, it was waiting, like a predator in the dark. The truth about what happened 25 years ago, the night Edward died, had been sitting between us for decades, unspoken, and when Margaret finally asked me directly whether there was more to Edward's death than we had admitted, I could no longer hide from it. With trembling hands, I told her what I had seen. David at the gorge, the argument, Edward shouting about stolen money, the shove that wasn't an accident, the desperate plea from a son who had already crossed a line no man should ever cross. Margaret wept as though losing Edward all over again, and I sat there choking on guilt because I had kept it from her, because I had chosen silence over truth. That silence made me an accomplice to everything that followed. Now, years later, the mask David had worn so perfectly was beginning to slip, and we both knew the danger was no longer theoretical. He had killed once, and there was nothing to stop him from killing again. The truth once spoken could never be unsaid, and after I confessed everything to Margaret, the air in our home felt heavy, charged with a dread that made every tick of the clock sound like a warning. For the first time in decades, we were united not only by love but by fear. Fear of the son who still smiled at us across the dinner table, who still called every Sunday to ask about our health, who still hugged us like a dutiful child. And yet, beneath those gestures, we now saw only calculation. Margaret whispered at night that we should go to the police, but I shook my head, knowing what it would mean. Admitting my silence, my complicity, my cowardice that had allowed David's lie to fester until it grew into something monstrous. We were trapped in the web I had spun myself, forced to pretend while inside we braced for the blow we knew would come. That blow arrived disguised as kindness. One evening the phone rang and David's voice, smooth as silk, spilled through the receiver. "Dad," he said, "Laura and I were talking, and we think it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. How about a family trip to the mountains? A day in the fresh air, a hike, pictures together, just us." His words sent ice through my veins. Across the table, Margaret's face paled as she listened. The mountains, those same mountains where Edward had fallen, where David's lies had first begun. "That's a sweet idea, son," I forced out, though my voice shook. "Let us think about it and call you tomorrow." When I hung up, Margaret and I sat in silence, the same thought echoing between us without needing to be said. It was an invitation to our execution. That night we didn't sleep. We clung to each other in the dark, whispering frantic plans, searching for a way out. Margaret said we should refuse, but I knew refusal would only delay the inevitable. If not the mountains, it would be a fire, a car accident, a robbery gone wrong. Better, I reasoned, to walk into the trap with our eyes open than wait helplessly for death in our own home. Still, we needed something proof, evidence that could survive even if we did not. I retrieved my phone and showed Margaret how to set the recorder to run silently. "If we don't make it back," I told her, "this may be the only way the truth is ever known." She nodded through tears, and later that night she produced an envelope, sealed and addressed to her sister Harriet. "I wrote it all down," she whispered. "About Edward, about David, about what we think he plans for us. If we don't come home, Harriet will know where to find it." We went to bed that night like soldiers before battle, knowing the morning might never come. Saturday dawned bright and cruelly beautiful. David arrived whistling a tune, Laura beaming at his side, carrying baskets of food as if we were off on nothing more sinister than a picnic. "Ready for the big adventure?" he called, his cheerfulness like nails on glass. At breakfast he spread a map on the table, pointing out the trail, the lookout, the view of the valley. It's spectacular, he said, and the word dripped with hidden meaning. As he spoke, I discreetly activated the recorder on my phone. Every word, every smile, every false gesture would be preserved. The drive to the mountains was 2 hours long and felt like a funeral procession in disguise. Laura sang along with the radio, tapping her fingers on the dashboard as though we were headed to a festival. David drove carefully, stopping at every sign, avoiding the smallest risk. He wanted nothing to mar the perfection of his plan. Margaret squeezed my hand from time to time, a silent reminder that we had to endure this together, no matter how it ended. At the trailhead, the forest greeted us with tall trees and the rush of a river, a place that might have been paradise if not for the darkness in our hearts. We started along the path, Laura bounding ahead with her camera, exclaiming over wildflowers, over birdsong, playing the part of a devoted daughter-in-law savoring a day with her in-laws. David stayed behind us, his steps deliberate, his eyes fixed on our backs. Every time I turned to look, he smiled, that perfect smile I had once mistaken for love. The trail grew steeper. My legs burned, Margaret panted beside me, and David's voice came soft and false. Need to rest, Mom? Dad? We don't want you to overdo it. But I could hear the impatience beneath, the eagerness for the moment when our exhaustion would make us easier prey. After an hour, Laura called out, "Look at that cliff! The view must be incredible from up there. Let's climb and take some photos." My heart thudded like a drum. The cliff rose 90 feet above the trail, its rocks loose, its edge unforgiving. It was perfect, too perfect for an accident. "I'm not sure that's wise," I said, my voice tight. "We're not as young as we used to be." David had already turned up the side path, ropes and gear slung over his shoulder, grinning like a man leading lambs to slaughter. "Come on, Dad, it'll only take a minute. You'll thank me when you see the view." Margaret's hand trembled in mine as we followed. We climbed slowly, the stones shifting under our shoes, every step a battle. At the top, the valley spread out before us, breathtaking, endless. On any other day, I might have felt awe, but all I saw was the jagged gorge waiting below. Laura positioned herself with her camera. "Stand together," she chirped. "Hug. Smile. Let the world see your love." David stepped behind us, just close enough, just waiting for the signal. I felt his presence like a shadow at my back. Margaret and I embraced, smiling through terror, knowing that with one small shove we would be gone. And then Laura lowered the camera slightly, her eyes hard and flat, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. "Smile," she said. "This will be your last photo." In that instant, David lunged forward, arms outstretched, and time itself seemed to shatter. The shove came with a force I had not felt since I was a young man on the football field, but this time there was no cheering crowd, no padded helmets, only the roar of the wind as Margaret and I teetered at the cliff's edge, with David's weight pressing against us. Instinct took over. In that last heartbeat before the abyss claimed us, I twisted and grabbed his wrist, dragging him forward with a strength born of sheer desperation. "If we die, son, you're coming with us," I shouted, my voice ragged, and for one surreal second all four of us, David, Laura, Margaret, and I, were tangled in a grotesque dance of limbs on the brink of nothingness. Laura screamed, clawing at David to pull him back, but her panic only added to the imbalance. The ground gave way, and suddenly we were falling, a blur of sky, rock, and terror. The world spun, and then came the bone-crushing impact. Pain like fire ripped through my body as ribs cracked. My shoulder tore, and blood filled my mouth. The sound of Margaret's cry mingled with the sickening thuds of David and Laura hitting the jagged rocks beside us. For a moment there was only silence, broken by the gurgle of the river below and the pounding of my heart. I wanted to scream, to move, but then I heard Margaret's voice, faint and quivering. "Don't move. Play dead." It was the only chance we had, and with every ounce of will I forced myself to remain still, eyes half open, chest rising so shallowly it would seem lifeless. Minutes stretched like hours as I listened to David's groans a few feet away. "Laura, are you alive?" he rasped, his voice choked with pain. "My leg," she moaned. "It's broken." God, it hurts. Even then, even shattered and bleeding, their thoughts turned not to repentance but to survival and cover-up. "The old folks?" Laura hissed between gasps. "Dead," David croaked. They're not moving, not breathing. It worked, just like we planned." Her bitter laugh curdled my blood. "Well, except for the part where we fell too. But at least we won't have to pretend anymore." The truth spilled from their lips as freely as the blood from their wounds, and I clung to each word like proof written in stone. They crawled, dragging their broken bodies, rehearsing aloud the story they would tell the rescuers. A tragic fall, an accident during a hike, two devastated children who had watched their beloved parents plunge to their deaths. "Remember," David panted. "Dad tripped, tried to grab Mom, and they both fell. We tried to help but lost our footing. That's what happened. That's all anyone needs to know." Laura's voice, sweet once, now venomous, replied, "We've practiced it enough. No one will ever suspect. We're just the lucky survivors of a family tragedy." Their voices grew fainter as they crawled toward the trail, and finally the silence of the gorge returned, heavy and absolute. Only then did I whisper to Margaret, barely audible, "I'm alive." She exhaled a sob that was half relief, half agony. "So am I," she said, her voice raw. "My leg is broken. My ribs too, I think. What about you?" Every inch of me burned, but I whispered back, "Hurt bad, but breathing. That's enough." Above us, the sky was beginning to darken, and the chill crept in. We lay in the dirt and blood, waiting, knowing help would come but dreading who would reach us first. Hours seemed to pass until the sound of voices and helicopters broke the stillness. David's voice rang out strong despite his injuries, perfectly practiced. "My parents, please hurry, they fell. We tried to save them." His performance would have fooled anyone who hadn't heard his true self minutes before. The rescuers descended with ropes and lights, their voices professional, calm, unaware that they were stepping into a web of lies. "Two down here," one called out. One man critical but stable, the woman unresponsive. A gloved hand pressed to my throat, another to my chest. "Pulses faint," the rescuer announced. "Barely there. Get her on oxygen." The temptation to open my eyes and beg for help was nearly overwhelming, but Margaret's warning echoed in my mind. Play dead. If David and Laura suspected we lived, they would find a way to finish the job before the truth saw daylight. So I lay limp as the rescuers strapped me to a stretcher, listening to their words, to the sympathetic murmurs they gave David and Laura, calling them brave, calling their survival a miracle. A miracle? The irony was so sharp it hurt worse than my wounds. Lifted from the gorge, carried toward the waiting helicopter, I let the hum of the rotor fill my head. Beside me, Margaret lay pale, her face streaked with blood, but I saw the faint rise and fall of her chest and clung to it like the last thread of hope. In the helicopter, paramedics worked swiftly, voices urgent but steady. The man's critical but alive. The woman's condition unstable, but there's a chance. I felt the needle in my arm, the rush of oxygen, the fog closing in. Just before darkness swallowed me whole, I heard one of the paramedics murmur, "It's amazing they survived that fall." Amazing, yes. But what would be more amazing still was if truth itself survived with us, carried on the phone recording in my pocket, waiting to tear apart the facade my son had built for a quarter of a century. The hospital lights burned like a second sun above me, harsh and unyielding, pulling me back into consciousness against my will. My body felt like a battlefield, every breath a stab, every movement a betrayal. I forced my eyelids to stay half closed, remembering Margaret's whisper, remembering David's voice in the gorge declaring us dead. If he believed that, we had a chance. But if he saw the truth in my eyes, it would all be over. The voices around me blurred at first, doctors calling out vitals, nurses rushing, machines beeping in erratic rhythm, but gradually clarity returned. A nurse's voice, gentle but firm, spoke close to my ear. "Pulse is stronger than expected for her condition. Let's monitor carefully." Relief stirred inside me. They thought I was unconscious, not gone. That illusion might be the thin veil between survival and a second attempt on our lives. Footsteps approached, heavier, deliberate, and I knew before I heard his voice who it was. "Doctor, can we see them?" "Just for a few minutes," David asked, his tone painted with grief so convincing that even I almost believed it. "We need to say goodbye, in case." His words cracked on cue, the performance of a lifetime. The doctor hesitated, then agreed, and the sound of the curtain being drawn back made my heart race. David's hand slid into mine, warm, steady, but the poison beneath it burned. "Mom," he whispered, his breath brushing my ear. "If you can hear me, know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened." Sweet lies, but his grip tightened as his voice dropped lower, meant only for me. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Dad. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Edward." My blood ran cold, but I kept still, knowing this was the confession that could damn him if someone else heard. And someone had. I saw, through the slit of my lashes, the nurse frozen at the monitor, her eyes wide, her face pale. She had heard it all. Laura's voice broke the silence, soft but sharp as a blade. "You've been like a father to me," she murmured, her tone dripping with false tenderness. "We'll never forget you." I wanted to spit at her, to scream that I had already seen her soul stripped bare. But I remained motionless, my only rebellion the steady beat of my heart refusing to stop. After they left, the nurse leaned closer, her badge flashing the name INS. Her whisper brushed my ear. "Sir, if you're in danger, give me a sign." I managed the smallest twitch of my finger. Her eyes widened. "My God," she breathed. "You're pretending. If those people hurt you, move 3 times." I forced my finger to move thrice, each motion agony but filled with determination. She swallowed hard, straightened, and played her role, fiddling with the machines as though nothing unusual had passed. Minutes later, she returned with the head doctor and, to my relief, 2 police officers in plain clothes. The doctor's voice was low but steady. "You are safe now. If you can hear us, open your eyes slowly." I obeyed, lashes fluttering, light stabbing my vision, until I saw their faces, the doctor serious, the nurse trembling with conviction, the officers stern and ready. "Detective Johnson," one introduced himself. "We believe you're in grave danger. Can you tell us what really happened?" My voice was a rasp, but I forced it out. My son and his wife pushed us." The words tasted like ash, but once spoken they gave me strength. The detective's eyes sharpened. "Do you have proof?" I whispered back. "Phone, recording, in my pocket. It has everything." His expression hardened as he hurried to Margaret's room, where she too was awake enough to confirm the evidence. Minutes later, Henry's phone, cracked from the fall but still functional, was in police hands, its files pulled, its damning contents undeniable. While they listened, David and Laura sat in the waiting room, their masks still firmly in place, receiving condolences from strangers who thought them grieving children instead of predators. They had no idea the walls were already collapsing around them. Detective Johnson returned, eyes glinting. "The recording is clear. We have them admitting to planning your deaths, and even references to Edward's murder. It's enough to arrest them." Relief surged, tempered by fear. "Not yet," I croaked. "If they know we're alive, they'll try again. They'll destroy the evidence." The detective nodded. "We'll move carefully. Protection is already in place." And then, as if fate wanted to deliver the final stroke, David's arrogance betrayed him. I heard his voice through the thin walls, sharp with frustration when an officer delayed his request. "That's impossible," he hissed. "We saw them die. They were dead." His slip was caught on a police recorder, his own words now shackling him tighter than any chain. Within hours, the warrants were signed. The arrests came swift, decisive. From my hospital window, I saw officers close in, saw Laura's face contort in panic, heard her distant wail. "It was his idea. He forced me." And David's roar of betrayal. "You planned it? You told me the cliff was perfect." Their alliance shattered in an instant, their true selves laid bare. They were dragged away, not as grieving family, but as murderers. For the first time in 25 years, I breathed without a lie pressing on my chest. Yet as I lay back against the pillow, Margaret's hand in mine, I felt not triumph, but sorrow, the sorrow of a father who had lost both sons, one to death, the other to greed and cruelty. Still, justice had begun, and truth, long buried, had finally risen to the light. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of recovery and interrogation. each day pulling Margaret and me further from the brink of death, yet closer to the unavoidable reckoning with our only surviving son. The detectives came daily, piecing together timelines, verifying the recordings, cross-checking financial records that revealed not only David's desperate debts, but also the trail of forged documents and stolen funds that stretched back years. Reporters swarmed the hospital lobby, calling it the most shocking case of family betrayal in decades, though none of their headlines could capture the ache that came from knowing the boy I once rocked to sleep had turned into a man who plotted my murder. By the time we were strong enough to leave the hospital, the trial was already looming, and I dreaded it more than the cliff, more than the fall, more than the surgeries that stitched my body back together. To sit in a courtroom, face to face with the son who had smiled in my home and called me dad while quietly planning my death, felt like a punishment in itself. Yet when the day came, Margaret gripped my hand and whispered, "For Edward, for the truth." So we walked into that courthouse, our steps slow but steady, our backs straight despite the weight of betrayal. David sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, suit pressed, his eyes empty. Laura sat beside him, her face a mask of cold resignation. They did not look at us, not once. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision. The stolen money, the staged accident, the phone recordings where Laura's voice dripped with malice. And David spoke of us as obstacles, the decades-old truth about Edward's death that my silence had hidden. Every word was a blade twisting in me, but each blade was also justice. When it was my turn to testify, I rose on shaky legs, my crutch tapping against the polished floor. I told them everything about Edward's dreams, about the night I followed David to the gorge and chose silence over truth, about the years of stolen savings, about the false smiles and the pressure to sign away our lives, and finally about the cliff, the push, the fall, and the desperate ruse of playing dead. I ended not with anger, but with the grief of a father. My son died 25 years ago, I told the jury. What's left is a man I don't recognize, a man who killed his brother and tried to kill his parents for money. He is no longer my child. He is a stranger who wears my son's face. Margaret's testimony echoed mine, her words trembling but clear, her love for our family shining even through the wreckage. The defense tried their tricks, claiming desperation, financial pressure, even suggesting it was a crime of passion, not premeditation, but the evidence was too strong, the lies too many. The jury deliberated for 3 long days, but when they returned, their verdict was firm. Guilty of first-degree murder for Edward's death, guilty of attempted murder for the attack on us, guilty of fraud and theft that had bled our family dry. The judge's sentence rang out like a final bell. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Laura wept, begging for mercy, while David sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, his eyes devoid of regret. I felt no triumph, only the heavy relief of truth acknowledged. Yet amid the sorrow, one thought gave us purpose, the grandchildren. Innocent children who had called me Grandpa and Margaret Grandma, who had been taught to smile for photos taken by parents plotting murder. They were too young to understand why their mother and father would never come home, too fragile to face the world alone. With the help of social services, Margaret and I applied for custody, and after months of hearings and evaluations, the children came to live with us. At first they were quiet, eyes wide, haunted by confusion. Nightmares woke them crying, asking why their parents couldn't tuck them in. We told them gently that their mom and dad had made mistakes too big to fix, but that they were safe with us now. Over time, laughter returned, hesitant at first, then freer. The sound of little feet filled the halls again, not with the dread of betrayal, but with the promise of new life. Each night before bed, I tell them stories of their Uncle Edward, the brother they will never meet, the man who should have been their protector. I tell them about his kindness, his laughter, his dreams of being an engineer. I make sure they know that in our family, love and honesty are not illusions, but truths worth fighting for. And as I tuck them under the quilt Margaret sewed years ago, I whisper promises to the heavens, that the cycle of deceit and greed ends here, that these children will grow up knowing real love, not the poisonous kind their parents once offered. 1 year after the verdict, I sat on the porch at dusk, Margaret by my side, the children chasing fireflies in the yard. The world felt fragile, scarred, but also strangely whole. Margaret leaned her head against my shoulder and asked softly, "Do you think we'll ever be truly happy again?" I watched the children's laughter rise into the twilight and answered with a voice steadier than I felt. "Maybe not the way we once were, but happiness doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means surviving and making sure the truth outlives the lies." A year had passed since the gavel struck, sealing David and Laura's fate, yet the echoes of their betrayal lingered like a shadow across every quiet moment. Our house, once the stage for Sunday dinners and family laughter, now bore the scars of silence. Still, the sound of our grandchildren's voices breathed life back into its weary walls, and each day with them felt like both a blessing and a reminder of what we had lost. Margaret and I learned quickly that raising children at our age was not for the faint of heart. Our bones ached, our patience stretched thin at times, but the joy of hearing them call us Grandpa and Grandma with unguarded affection gave us the strength to rise each morning. They asked questions, sometimes innocent, piercing questions that left us breathless. "Why can't Mommy come home? When will Daddy visit?" we answered with careful honesty, never with lies, because deception had poisoned our family for too long. We told them their parents had made choices that hurt people deeply, and those choices meant they couldn't live here anymore. They cried, they clung to us, but in time they began to understand that love was not measured by promises, but by presence. At night, when I tucked them under the quilt, I spoke of Edward. I told them of his wide smile, his dream of building bridges, his kindness that filled every room. I wanted his memory to live on in them, to know that, though his life was stolen, his spirit would guide our family towards something better. Margaret often joined me, adding gentle details, the way Edward once carried her books home from school, the way he carved little boats from scraps of wood to sail in the creek. Together we wove a picture of an uncle they would never meet, but whose love for them was real nonetheless. Beyond our home, the world had not forgotten our story. Reporters still called, documentaries asked for interviews, strangers sent letters of sympathy mixed with morbid curiosity. They called it the most shocking family betrayal in recent history, but I never cared for headlines. For us, it wasn't a story, it was our life, broken open for the world to dissect. The trial had given us justice, but justice was not peace. Peace was something we had to build, brick by fragile brick, in the daily acts of love that restored meaning to our days. Sometimes, when I walked the garden at dawn, I thought of David, not the man in the courtroom, but the boy I once taught to throw a baseball, the boy whose laughter once echoed beside his brothers. I asked myself over and over if there was a moment I could have saved him from the darkness, if my silence 25 years ago had been the seed that grew into murder. Guilt was a heavy companion, but Margaret reminded me gently that love can guide, but it cannot always rescue. People choose their paths, and David had chosen his. In the evenings, after the children had gone to bed, Margaret and I sat on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, watching the fireflies blink against the night. Sometimes we spoke of the future, of the possibility of seeing the ocean one day, as we once dreamed in our youth. Other times we simply held hands, letting silence speak where words could not. Survival had bonded us deeper than even love had in the early days. We were no longer the naive couple who thought family was unbreakable. We were battle-scarred, wiser, and grateful for every sunrise we were allowed. As the seasons turned, I began to notice the children laughing more freely, running barefoot through the yard, chasing one another until their cheeks turned red. Their joy was contagious, their innocence a balm on old wounds. In them, I saw the proof that evil had not won, that though greed and betrayal had tried to consume us, love had endured. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Margaret leaned against me and whispered, "Do you think Edward would be proud?" I swallowed hard, my eyes fixed on the children's silhouettes in the fading light. "Yes," I said finally. "He would be proud that his family chose truth, that his nieces and nephews will grow up knowing love, not lies. Proud that we survived." The cicadas sang, the children laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of remembering and choosing to live anyway. 2 years have now passed since the verdict, and life in our small Midwestern town has taken on a rhythm that feels both new and strangely familiar. The sun still rises over the same maple trees, the mailman still waves as he passes our gate, and the old oak table still stands in the kitchen, worn smooth by decades of hands, laughter, and tears. Yet beneath that familiarity is a quiet resilience, a sense that Margaret and I have built something entirely different from the life we once had. We are no longer just parents or grandparents. We are the keepers of truth, the guardians of a legacy scarred by betrayal, but not defined by it. Our grandchildren have grown taller, their voices surer, their laughter no longer tentative but full-bodied, echoing through the yard like a hymn of renewal. They run barefoot through the grass, climb the apple tree at the edge of the property, and come racing into the kitchen with wild stories of imaginary adventures. Sometimes when I watch them, I can almost see Edward's spirit running beside them, guiding their steps, keeping them safe. Every night before bed, I continue the ritual of telling them stories, some about Edward, some about the world beyond our little town, some about the values I want to plant deep in their hearts: honesty, kindness, courage. They listen wide-eyed, their small faces glowing in the soft lamplight, and I pray that the lessons of our past will protect them from the darkness that once touched our family. Margaret has become their anchor, steady and patient, teaching them to cook, to sew, to tend the garden. They trail behind her like ducklings, eager to help, their laughter mingling with the sound of wind chimes on the porch. Together we have created a home that is not perfect, but real, a place where love is practiced daily, not performed like a mask. Outside our walls, people still remember our story. Every so often, a reporter calls or a stranger writes a letter, telling us how our ordeal changed the way they see their own families. Some say it gave them courage to speak up about secrets. Others confess it made them wary of those closest to them. I always respond the same way. Our story is not a warning about family, it's a warning about silence, about the dangers of ignoring the shadows in the name of love. Yet even as the world moves on, the past sometimes returns in quiet, unexpected ways. A few months ago, a letter arrived from David. It came through his lawyer, a short, handwritten note on lined paper. He didn't apologize, not really. He wrote about prison life, about how Laura no longer speaks to him, about how the walls feel like they're closing in. He said he thinks of Edward sometimes. He said he wonders if he would have turned out different if I had confronted him that night at the gorge instead of covering up his crime. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a box with other documents from the trial. I did not respond. Margaret asked if I wanted to, but I told her no. The time for words between David and me had passed the moment he chose to take his brother's life. Forgiveness may come someday, but it will not come through letters or excuses. It will come, if at all, through my grandchildren growing up to be better than their parents. That is the only redemption I care about now. The children ask about their parents less and less. At first their questions came daily, then weekly, now only on quiet nights when the house feels too big. We answer gently, without bitterness. Your mom and dad made choices that hurt people, I tell them. But that doesn't mean you have to make the same choices. You can write your own story. They nod, their eyes solemn but hopeful, and I know they are listening in ways words cannot measure. Some evenings, when the kids are asleep and the house has gone still, Margaret and I sit on the porch swing, holding hands. The stars above are the same ones we used to dream under, but our dreams are simpler now. We no longer talk about traveling or seeing the ocean. We talk about small things: the next school project, the vegetables in the garden, the quilt Margaret is stitching from pieces of Edward's old shirts. Those small things are what keep us moving forward. Last month, on Edward's birthday, we held a small ceremony in the backyard. Just us and the children. We planted a young oak tree near the fence line, a living marker of his life. The children helped scoop soil over the roots, their small hands patting it down. Margaret said a prayer, her voice breaking halfway through, and I placed my palm on the sapling's thin trunk, feeling its strength, its promise of growth. This tree will outlive all of us, I told the kids. It will be here long after we're gone, reminding everyone who sees it that truth and love can endure. They didn't say anything, but I could see in their eyes that they understood. Afterward, we sat on the porch and watched the sunset bleed across the sky, the new tree standing like a sentinel in the fading light. I thought of David then, of the boy he had been, of the man he became. I wondered if he knew that out here, beyond the prison walls, life was still going on without him, that his children were growing strong and kind, despite everything. I hoped, in some distant corner of his heart, he felt both the weight of his choices and the strange mercy of knowing his parents had survived. The night settled around us, cool and soft, and the children's laughter drifted through the screen door. Margaret squeezed my hand, and for a moment I felt a peace deeper than any verdict, any headline, any gavel strike. We were alive, we had told the truth, we had broken the cycle, and though the scars would never fully fade, they no longer defined us. They were just lines in a story whose ending we were still writing, one bedtime, one lesson, one heartbeat at a time. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges, yet some wounds never close completely. It has been nearly 5 years since that day on the mountain when David and Laura tried to end our lives, and though the scars on my body have faded to pale reminders, the ones inside still ache with every memory. I sit most mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the grandchildren race across the yard, their laughter ringing through the same trees that once heard Edward's voice. They are older now, stronger, their innocence slowly giving way to curiosity, and I know the day is coming when their questions will dig deeper than I may be ready to answer. Margaret says honesty will protect them better than any shield, and she is right, but honesty carries weight. Still, the truth is what saved us, and truth will be the foundation we build their lives on. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of David, not the man in handcuffs, not the cold figure who sat stone-faced at trial, but the boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who cried when he scraped his knee, who laughed until tears ran down his cheeks when Edward teased him at the dinner table. Those dreams leave me hollow, because I wake to the memory of what he became, and no amount of longing can bridge the chasm between the boy I loved and the man who betrayed us. Margaret and I still receive letters from him, some angry, some pleading, all filled with the same restless energy of a man who cannot face the full truth of his actions. I rarely open them now. The last one I read ended with a line that struck me cold. I never meant for it to go this far. As if murder and betrayal could be measured like steps along a road he simply wandered too far down. There are no half measures in what he did. Edward is dead, and Margaret and I will live with that forever. But in our home, life moves forward. The children are thriving, doing well in school, making friends, filling our days with both chaos and joy. They have begun to play instruments, to draw, to write their own stories, and I see in them the promise of a future untainted by their parents' sins. They call us not just Grandpa and Grandma, but sometimes Mom and Dad when sleep blurs the edges of memory. The first time I heard it, my throat tightened, but Margaret smiled and whispered, "Let them call us whatever makes them feel safe." Safety is what we give them now, something their parents never truly offered. On Edward's birthday each year, we gather by the oak tree we planted in his memory. It has grown taller, stronger, its roots spreading deep, its branches stretching toward the sky. The children decorate it with ribbons, drawings, and sometimes small wooden carvings I help them make in the workshop. We tell stories of Edward, keeping his spirit alive not as a ghost that haunts us, but as a guardian who watches over us. I tell them he would have been an engineer, building bridges and towers, and they giggle and say Uncle Edward could have built a treehouse better than the one I cobbled together. Their laughter is the closest thing to redemption I will ever know. The world beyond our fence still whispers about us sometimes. Documentaries, articles, curious strangers who write letters, people fascinated by the darkest parts of our story. But I've learned not to live for their eyes. They see betrayal and horror. We live love and survival. The difference is everything. The trial may have closed one chapter, but our life is not a tale of courtroom drama. It is a story of resilience, of choosing each day to rise from the ashes of what could have destroyed us. Some evenings, when the children are asleep and the crickets sing, Margaret and I sit side by side, holding hands, no words necessary. In her eyes, I see the years, the pain, but also the unbreakable thread that binds us. We were nearly torn apart by lies, but the truth bound us closer than ever. Happiness, I have learned, is not the absence of sorrow, but the decision to keep living despite it. And so I carry on, not for myself alone, but for Margaret, for Edward, for the grandchildren who deserve a life of laughter instead of fear. I know one day the children will be old enough to understand the full story, to learn what their parents tried to do and what their grandparents endured. When that day comes, I will tell them plainly, without bitterness, without hate. I will tell them that evil can live even in the people we love most, but that love itself is stronger if we choose it to be. I will tell them that silence is a prison and that truth, though it can shatter, is also what sets us free. And when my time comes, when my breath finally leaves me, I pray they will stand tall, not as the grandchildren of betrayal, but as the children of truth. The oak tree will stand then, tall and unwavering, its roots deep in the soil of our pain, its branches reaching toward the sky of our hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, when they look at it, they will remember that even in the face of the deepest darkness, light can grow, love can endure, and family rebuilt with honesty and courage can survive anything. It has been nearly a decade since the night my world shattered on that cliffside. Nearly a decade since Margaret and I played dead among the rocks while our son rehearsed lies to save his own skin. Time has moved forward in relentless fashion, yet there are days when the memory is so vivid it feels as though I am still there, wind roaring past my ears, gravity pulling us into darkness. The pain of broken bones has long since faded, replaced by the quieter ache of remembrance, but some wounds will never heal. They live beneath the surface like embers, glowing softly, flaring in dreams. And yet, life has blossomed in the ashes of that horror. Our grandchildren, once small and confused, have grown into young adults, carrying themselves with the kind of resilience I once doubted was possible. They are kind, thoughtful, and unafraid to ask difficult questions. The time finally came when Margaret and I sat them down beneath the oak tree planted in Edward's memory and told them everything, not the softened versions we once offered, but the unvarnished truth. We told them about their father and mother, about the lies, the greed, the betrayal, and the night they tried to kill us. We told them about Edward, the brother they never met, whose life was stolen long before theirs began. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, but they did not run from the truth. Instead, they wept, then asked us what they should do with this knowledge. I told them the only thing I could, that the truth is not a burden to carry alone, but a light to guide how they choose to live. I told them they were not destined to repeat their parents' mistakes, that every choice they made could break the cycle of deceit that once poisoned our family. And in that moment, I saw in their eyes a determination that gave me hope for the future. Margaret has grown older, her hair silver, her hands softer, yet she carries herself with a grace forged by survival. She still tends the garden, still hums while she kneads bread, still laughs at my clumsy jokes, but there is a depth in her now, a wisdom carved from years of hardship. At night, we sit on the porch, listening to the cicadas, watching the grandchildren's silhouettes move against the twilight. Sometimes she leans her head on my shoulder and whispers, "We made it." And though the words are simple, they carry the weight of everything we endured. We are not the same as we once were, we never will be, but we are alive, and that is a victory in itself. The outside world has long since turned its gaze elsewhere, but every so often a reporter will call, asking for follow-up interviews, wanting to know what became of the family at the center of that infamous trial. I usually decline, not out of shame, but out of weariness. Our story has already been told in headlines and documentaries, dissected by strangers who never knew Edward's laugh or the warmth of our home before it turned cold. What matters now is not how the world remembers our pain, but how our family moves forward from it. Still, I keep the recordings, the trial transcripts, the letters David sent from prison, all locked in a small chest in the study. Someday, when the grandchildren are ready, they may want to read them, to see for themselves the full measure of what happened. Until then, the chest remains closed, a silent testament to the darkest chapter of our lives. David remains in prison, serving the life sentence that justice demanded. I sometimes wonder what he looks like now, older, grayer, stripped of the charm that once fooled us all. I wonder if he ever feels regret, if he ever lies awake at night haunted by Edward's face, by our survival, by the family he destroyed. Margaret says it doesn't matter, that his soul is not ours to heal. But a father's heart does not let go easily, even when it knows it must. Forgiveness is a word I wrestle with. I do not hate David, not anymore. Hate is too heavy to carry for a lifetime. But forgiveness is not something I owe him either. Forgiveness, if it comes, will not be for his sake, but for mine. and I am still learning how to let go of the weight he left behind. Perhaps one day, standing beneath Edward's oak tree, I will release that burden to the wind. Perhaps not. What I do know is this: the grandchildren are the true legacy of this family. They are proof that love, when it is honest and steadfast, can outlive betrayal. They are the bridge between what was lost and what can still be built. Watching them laugh, succeed, and dream is the only redemption I will ever need. And so I rise each morning, pour my coffee, and step onto the porch to greet the day. The air is cool, the world is quiet, and for a few moments, peace feels possible. I know the scars will always be there, etched into the marrow of my bones, but they no longer define me. They are simply part of a story that, though marked by darkness, ends in survival, in truth, and in love. And as long as Margaret sits beside me, as long as the oak tree grows tall in Edward's memory, and as long as our grandchildren run laughing through the yard, I know the story is not one of tragedy, but of endurance. We lived. We spoke the truth, and in the end, that is enough. The years have stretched long since the day Margaret and I stood in court and watched the truth finally strip away every mask our son had worn. Time has taken its toll. Our hair has gone white, our steps are slower, our bones protest with each season, but we are still here, still breathing, still tethered to life by the laughter of our grandchildren and the quiet strength of each other. Looking back now, I see our story not just as a tale of betrayal, but as a testament to survival. For decades, silence was our prison, a silence born out of love and fear, a silence that allowed lies to grow into monsters. But truth, once spoken, cut through the darkness like a blade. It hurt, it scarred, but it saved us. That is what I want the world to understand. Silence is deadly, but truth, no matter how brutal, gives us a chance to live again. Edward's oak tree now towers over the yard, its branches wide and strong, its roots deep in the soil of our family's history. Beneath its shade, our grandchildren have grown from frightened children into confident young souls who know the value of honesty, who carry Edward's memory in their hearts even though they never met him. They are the proof that love can outlast treachery, that innocence can be preserved even after innocence has been stolen. Sometimes I sit beneath that tree and listen to the wind moving through its leaves, and I swear I hear Edward's laughter, carried back to us after all these years. David remains behind bars, and though his letters still come, filled with excuses and fragments of guilt, I no longer open them. Whatever he seeks from me, absolution, connection, pity, I cannot give. My love for him ended the moment he chose greed over blood, and yet a part of me will always grieve the boy he once was. That grief is my burden, and I will carry it until my last breath. But grief no longer rules me. What rules me now is gratitude for Margaret, for the chance to grow old despite the fall that should have killed us, for the children who run through the yard with hope in their eyes, for the quiet mornings and the long evenings when peace settles over the porch like a blanket. We are not the family we once were, but we are still a family, stitched together not by illusion but by hard-earned truth. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not just about betrayal or survival, it is about choice. We choose silence, or we choose truth. We choose bitterness, or we choose love. And every day, no matter how heavy the past feels, Margaret and I choose love. When my time comes, I hope those who remember me will not remember only the cliff, the betrayal, the trial. I hope they remember the way we endured, the way we built a home of laughter again, the way we planted a tree that will outlive us all. That is the legacy I wish to leave, not one of tragedy, but of resilience. The night air is cool now, the stars stretched wide across the sky. Margaret sits beside me, her hand in mine, the children's laughter drifting from the house. The oak tree stands tall in the distance, its leaves whispering in the dark. And I realize, with a clarity that steadies me, that though betrayal tried to break us, love has carried us further. We are survivors. We are truth-tellers. And that, after everything, is enough. And so, that is the story of how one family's secrets nearly destroyed everything, and how truth, though painful, became the only path to survival. It reminds us that the people closest to us can sometimes cause the deepest wounds, but also that resilience, honesty, and love can still carry us forward. Stories like this are not just about betrayal, they are about the choices we make when life tests us, the courage it takes to confront the truth, and the hope that even after tragedy, there can be healing. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and reflect on your own family or the power of truth, then I invite you to become part of this community. We share stories here not only to entertain, but to uncover lessons about life, loyalty, and resilience that speak to every generation. So please, take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when a new story is released. Your support through subscribing, liking, and sharing these videos helps us continue to bring you powerful stories that resonate deeply. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're listening from, or share your thoughts on this story. Your voices are what keep this channel alive and growing. Thank you for being here. And remember, even in the darkest family tragedies, truth has the power to set us free.